class at all, although you do need to understand specific or certain historical aspects. So we'll go over it, but again, I'm going to go over it relatively quickly. Like I've told you before, you have access to the PowerPoint online. Okay? How many of you have been having for A-push last year? How many waves of feminism are there?
Three.
2 to 5, depending on who you ask. All right? I'll be honest with you, to me there's 3. Okay? That's not what this PowerPoint's going to tell you, because I'm taking this off of other things that's what they want you to understand. Look, first of all, nobody's ever going to ask you a question, how many waves of feminism are there on a test? All right? So don't worry about that. In all honesty, I think it's the easiest way for you to understand it is first wave feminism is the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, which if you remember last year from A-Push, according to A-Push officially, how many waves of feminism were there? Only 2. They didn't count this one, right? Which I find a little comical because AP Government does count this one, but AP Government actually officially says that there's only 2 as well. Okay, AP Government doesn't count 1919, which is what A-Push counted as first wave feminism, which is what I count as second wave feminism. Okay, that's the struggle for suffrage and the right to vote, which happens with the 19th Amendment. Okay, that really is second wave feminism. Margaret Sanger comes out of that, like reproductive rights, things like that. It really is a feminist movement. All right, then what I call third wave feminism comes out in the 1960s. Okay, to me, third wave feminism really is still going today. I would put this to the present as a part of it. Although I've found things online and looking it up that say that third wave feminism ended in like 1987, 86, something like that. That fourth wave feminism somehow started in like 89. I don't know what the major events are that like changed that. And the difference between fourth and fifth wave feminism is literally one of them stopped on the 31st of a year and the next one started on the 1st, which is absurd. Which is why, to me, we've had one sort of concerted effort moving forward for equal rights for women since the 1960s. There really haven't been very many breaks in it. You'll note it, or anybody know about the March on Washington that's currently being planned?
Yeah.
Right?
Almost like 200,000 women are just walking over there because of Donald Trump's inauguration.
Well, it's not just Donald Trump's inauguration. I mean, that's a part of it, but it's more to it than that. And I mean, this is a long time building. All right. The 60s and what I refer to as third wave feminism is probably what Menonists really refer to as feminism, and like combative, like angry feminism or whatever, like man-hating feminism or whatever. Was that what you guys call it, Will?
No. That was more educated.
There are a number of, and we'll focus primarily on third wave feminism here. Obviously, second wave feminism did get women the right to vote, right? What did first wave feminism get them? Pretty much nothing, right? Sadly, first wave feminism is pretty unsuccessful in any of its types of reforms. Second wave feminism, women don't get the right to vote. They get some basic reproductive rights and things like that. But it's really third wave feminism where we see significant gains or increases for women. Things like the Equal Pay Act. Title IX is probably the one that you're most familiar with at this point, right? So Title IX actually dictates all sorts of things to ensure that for however many boys sports you have in high school, you have to have an equivalent number of girls sports. Okay? Title IX is actually how, like, Art Briles and Baylor got in trouble, right? That is an actual Title IX lawsuit. We know what happened with Art Briles and Baylor, right?
How about a lot of people get raped?
His football players were engaging in activities that were criminal, okay? That ranged anywhere from sexual harassment to like date rape, right? And I don't know enough details about the case. It's not something that I've followed personally, so I don't know if or how guilty they are or whatever. What's important to understand is that when the women reported it, the school didn't do anything. that's the Title IX violation. Alright, that's the problem. Okay. Obviously, there were other advancements as well. We know about Roe v. Wade. Women are more political now than what they had been in previous generations. In fact, women, so you understand, because of some of the progress that we made, women are actually, they make up a higher percentage of the voting population now than men do, usually. And women also make up a significantly higher percentage of the college population than what men do anymore. Women are actually more likely to go to college than men. And where I went to college, our campus population was 60% female, 40% male. All right. This is wildly out of date. Anybody know how many females are on the Supreme Court now? What, Will?
3.
3, correct. Well done, sir. All right. There are 3 females. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Elena. I can never remember if it's Kagan or Hagan. I don't know if it's an H or a K. But those are the 3 that are currently on it. And if you think about it, I mean, that makes up a significant portion. Just in case you can't do the math, that's almost 38%. Right? Which obviously is not the 50% that women make up in terms of the population, but that's significantly better than the historical 0%. Black rights or African American struggle for equal rights. I'll be honest with you, you'll hear me refer to it as black primarily. Not trying to be disparaging or disrespectful. Right? It's just a little easier that way. So we're 12% of the population here. Historically, we've had things like the Dred Scott decision. Hopefully you remember from A-Push that the real sort of travesty of that decision is not the fact that Dred Scott was not given his freedom. And the real problem with that decision in that case is that the justices basically told him he can't sue because he's not a human being. Right? They didn't just tell him that he couldn't have his freedom. They told him that suing was not an option for him because he was not human. And that he was a piece of property. And he could sue no more than your toaster could sue you. And obviously, shortly after this, we get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. We call these the Civil War Amendments. They are passed in the midst of the Civil War, and ratification of those 3 amendments is forced upon Southern states as a part of their re-entry into the Union. So all 3 of these, they outlaw slavery, they provide equal protection, and they provide the right to vote for black men, only black men. All right. During Reconstruction, they're widely enforced, and it is a pretty significant advantage for black people in the decade plus after the Civil War. Significant progress is made for blacks in the South. Once Reconstruction ends and the Union Army leaves, that all goes away. And any progress that they had is all wiped away with Jim Crow laws and forced segregation and whatnot. All right. Understand that there's 2 different types of segregation. There's de jure segregation and de facto segregation. Okay, de facto, well, we'll start with de jure since it's on the slide. De jure segregation is segregation by law, right? That's obviously what we had in the South after the Civil War. And segregation was forced upon a subset of the population. And that is different than de facto segregation. De facto segregation is what you will find when you go to college, right? De facto segregation is something that in a lot of places still happens. Okay? It shouldn't be that difficult for you to understand. In fact, if you go to any sort of major city in America, right, you will find de facto segregation. Right, one of my good friends is from Hell's Kitchen, which is in New York City. It is an Irish neighborhood. Hey, if you move into that neighborhood, if I moved into that neighborhood, they would look at me and be like, "You don't really want to live here, dude." I'm not Irish. Okay? That's de facto segregation, and that's segregation. They're not telling me I couldn't move in there. They're just saying that, you know, it's not really your culture and you might not fit in. And de facto segregation is something that happens sort of by choice, because we tend to surround ourselves with people that are similar to us. You'll find that in college because that's something that you will probably do in college, right? If you are the type that enjoys general douchebaggery, you'll probably join a fraternity. If you're not, you won't surround yourself with those types of people. Okay? During this time, so specifically the civil rights movement or the struggle for equal rights amongst blacks, we're looking at the 50s and 60s. This precedes third wave feminism ever so slightly. On some level, we really should talk about the black struggle for equal rights first, because you'll find that women at various times sort of try to piggyback on civil rights for other minority groups, right? Because once we start providing it for one group, it becomes considerably easier to provide it for others. And in the 60s, we begin to realize that we really do have two sort of separate societies here in the United States. One's black, one's white. They're not equal. All of this is brought to light in the 60s as a means of trying to sort of repair or fix some of the issues, right? I mean, even after like Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, if you had gone into, you take where I used to work as an example, right? When I was teaching in North Carolina, I taught at what was the historically black high school in Greensboro, North Carolina, which means that before Brown versus Board of Education, it was the one high school they bused all the black people to. And I taught there obviously 3 years ago, right? And all the time that I taught there, I had 2 white students who were not even American, they were Albanian, right? They were sisters. I had like 3 Hispanic students and 1 Asian student. And in the 3 years that I taught at that school, everybody else was still black. And again, that goes back to that idea of de facto segregation, but you still see some of the same problems with all of this in terms of this separate and unequal aspect or quality, right? I mean, there was a wing of the school basically that did not have air conditioning, and which I realize North Carolina does not get as hot as Texas, but it still gets hot there. And trying to teach in August with no air conditioning in North Carolina is miserable. To the point where the administration actually let teachers show up in like shorts and a tank top because it was that ridiculously hot in those classrooms. Because if I had worn a tie, I probably would have passed out. Alright? There's always a sort of a two-pronged struggle, especially when you're looking at equal rights for black people, although I guess you can make the same argument for women. But there's a two-pronged struggle in terms of sort of social and then economic equality. And social equality, or we throw political in with social, is something that we're a little bit more in tune with or able to comprehend and sort of advocate for. Economic equality continues to lag behind, and obviously it continues to lag behind to this point, right? We talked about this the other day when we said that, you know, if a white man makes $1 and a black man makes 80 cents and a white woman makes 75 cents and a black woman makes 50 cents, right? So we realize some of those problems. One of the ways about trying to combat that is affirmative action. We'll talk about that a little bit more, especially in terms of like college admissions. But for the most part, there's I don't want to say a subset, there's a significant portion of the American population that is adamantly opposed to affirmative action type programs because they believe affirmative action programs to be racist in their very nature. Which you could probably argue that they are. But, I mean, I think at the same time, it's just as easy to argue that if we've been that racist for so long, a little bit of racism racism in the opposite direction and going to kill anybody. Okay, Hispanics make up about 13% of our population. Okay, some of the key issues there in terms of what they're looking for in equal rights. Bilingualism, especially in terms of education for immigrants that are coming to this country who do not speak English at the time. Regardless of what you think about this, I can tell you the easiest solution to this, honest to God, make everybody bilingual. If you can speak English or Spanish, either of the two, you can actually communicate with over 90% of the world's population. The world's. Okay? Which includes like the 1.2 billion Chinese people. Okay? Because instead of only teaching people Mandarin Chinese or whichever I know there's multiple dialects of the Chinese language, whichever the local dialect is there. Basically every Chinese child is brought up bilingually in order to be able to communicate with the world. Truthfully, America should do that as well. Right? There's an old joke. People that speak multiple languages are called multilingual. People that speak two languages are called bilingual, right? Multi means many, bi means two. People that speak one language are called Americans. Okay? Asians, about 4% of the population. They're, in terms of struggle for equal rights, they have not had it nearly as bad, especially in the last century or so. That doesn't mean that they didn't have the same problems as other subsets of their population during the 19th century, especially on the West Coast. And then obviously we had Korematsu versus the United States, the internment of Japanese during World War II, which was highly problematic. All right, so we do all of that so that we can get to equal protection under the law, because equal protection is all about discrimination-based law. Okay? So if we're going to say equal protection, what that means is that we cannot discriminate or we cannot deny somebody rights or equality based on some sort of arbitrary mean, such as race, gender, ethnicity, religion, whatever. Okay? Now, that being said, does discrimination happen in law? Yes. Okay? I would imagine it has not happened. Well, okay. Let's ask this one. How many of you can drive in this room? Anybody in this room not 16 yet? Okay? So she's being discriminated against, right? How many of you in this room can legally consume alcohol? Right? You are all being discriminated against, but that's acceptable. That's acceptable forms of discrimination. It is inevitable, and things like that are going to happen. Okay? For the most part, it usually occurs because there is some sort of grounds or justification for it, right? You should not consume alcohol because your liver is not fully developed. Okay?
That was your frontal lobe.
Probably. I'm not a scientist, so like this is not my area of expertise, but I know that your liver does not fully develop until you're into almost your mid-20s. And your liver is what processes out toxins, which is what alcohol is. You're kidding yourself if you don't think that alcohol is a toxin. Alright? So that's why you don't drink. Okay? You don't operate a motor vehicle prior to the age of 16 because...
Oh, that was frontal lobe.
That one's the frontal lobe? Okay, then there you go. Alright? Okay, I was going to make a joke because, like, I taught Will when he was a freshman and he probably couldn't have seen over the steering wheel.
Okay, I wasn't that short.
What?
I wasn't that short. It's like average height. How does that mean?
Yeah, you were tiny as a freshman. Yeah, like...
I know.
Okay, so here's the thing. So we understand that the discrimination is going to happen. Again, how many of us in this room are old enough to legally vote? Oh, more than I thought. Wonderful. Okay, I hope you're already registered to vote. I hope if you were eligible to vote in November, you did. Okay. Actually, I'm going to stop because I'm supposed to tell you this by state law. When you get close to your 18th birthday, come and see me. I have voter registration cards for you. You're actually supposed to legally be handed a voter registration card in your class. I am handing it to you right now, except a lot of you are like 16 and you can't register until you're 17 years and 10 months. So you're basically just handing it back to me. If you want to register and you are 17 years and 10 months or older, come see me. I'll give you a voter registration card. It's free to register. Okay? All you got to do is fill out a little thing. The postage is already paid. You just mail it in. You're a registered voter and you can vote in the next election. Okay? Wonderful. Let's see. if you want to claim that you are being discriminated against, the burden of proof, and again, that's a term that we've used in this class, the burden of proof falls on the plaintiff, right? So if Will thinks that he is being discriminated against because he is a man, he must prove how he is being discriminated against as a meninist.
I can't babysit. I can't babysit.
That's absolutely not true.
Oh no, that's true. I wasn't allowed to get my babysit.
No, that's you personally.
No.
Because I would not trust you with my daughter. I mean, I'm just saying.
I'm so good with kids.
Will, I love you, you know this. But I've seen your work ethic. I'm 99% certain that if I left you with my child would be completely unattended for the entire time I was gone.
Babies are so dope. I love them.
Okay. Now, there again, other acceptable forms of discrimination, just so you realize this, things like, you know, a felon can't get a teaching credential. That should make sense to you, right? Which obviously means I've never been convicted of a crime.
Are you sure?
Oh, I'm certain I've never been convicted, yes.
Is it like,
I'm not a felon. I've never been convicted of a crime.
is it even like minor offenses though, or is it like any?
No. So there's a difference in law between felonies and misdemeanors.
Oh,
Okay? Have I ever gotten a speeding ticket? Yes, that's a misdemeanor. Okay? Have I not told y'all I got 3 speeding tickets in 6 days?
you told me,
Yeah, I got 3 speeding tickets in 6 days when I was a teenager.
your road trip, right?
Yeah. We're driving one in Alabama, one in Texas, and one in Wyoming. Yeah. Now, if the government is the one you're determining is discriminating, right? So Will's saying that he's being discriminated against by Sally because Sally won't let him watch her baby, right? Then the burden of proof is on Will. If Will is saying that he is being discriminated against by the University of Arkansas, because he doesn't get in because he's claiming he didn't get in because he was a white dude and they let in like some chicks that weren't underqualified, because that's probably the way Will would word it. Okay. Then the burden of proof actually shifts onto the government. So if you're claiming, and I use the University of Arkansas as a public institution, right, it'll be different than Baylor. Okay. So like if you want to claim that Baylor is discriminating against you, burden of proof is still on you. Baylor's a private university. If you claim the University of Texas is discriminating against you, the burden of proof moves to the University of Texas. Understand the difference? Okay? Because at that point, we are more concerned about governmental discrimination rather than sort of individual or personal discrimination. Right? Like I said, I'm not going to let Will watch my daughter. It has nothing to do with his gender. It has everything to do with his work ethic over the last 3 years that I've been his teacher. And this is the 3rd year that I've been Will's teacher. Okay?
I'm not just gonna like leave your baby.
I'm not so certain. And it's not a risk I'm willing to take, Will.
Oh my god, so good with kids.
Okay, now, affirmative action programs in terms of equal protection under law, there are instances in which affirmative action programs are actually deemed acceptable. One of the easiest explanations, one of the easiest ways for you to understand this is in terms of college admissions. College admissions, right, even public universities can take your ethnicity, your gender, your race, et cetera, into account when deciding who they want to go to the university. In which case, there are going to be instances in which higher qualified people are overpassed or not accepted, while underqualified or people with lower qualifications do get in. The reason being is that in an educational setting, diversity is actually seen as a necessary and positive tool, which is ironic or comical considering that colleges now are creating these safe spaces and segregating themselves, and you're only like surrounded by people of your own race and gender, right? So as to not offend others. But historically, and the truth of the matter is it really does make a difference. The more diversity you have in a classroom, the better off it is. Okay? Because somebody like Will brings one opinion to the table, right? Somebody like Mushel brings a second opinion to the table. Their opinions are not going to be the same because their life has not been the same up until this point. Okay? The more opinions that you can get, the broader your education becomes. Okay? Because no matter how hard Will tries, Will never understand what it is like to be a woman. Okay? But if Will was only ever surrounded by men, then he wouldn't even really be able to have any sort of empathy for the plight of women because he would have no comprehension or understanding. Okay, we understand that? And racial gerrymandering, and gerrymandering is a term we'll get to a lot in the next unit. I think it's either unit 2 or 3. So it's either the next one or the one after that. We'll talk about gerrymandering in a lot more detail. If you don't know what it is, real quick, it's just dividing up districts within states for congressional purposes. Racial gerrymandering basically means you draw like weird lines around all the ghettos. So you put all the ghettos together and the poor black people are in one district and they vote for a Democrat and you don't care about that one district. And then you get a little white majority everywhere else and they all vote for Republicans. And then Republicans control everything, right? Or vice versa, Democrats do it too. Don't think that only Republicans racially gerrymander, all right? But this is not acceptable or not allowed, okay? Again, sex discrimination based off of gender is generally a lot more difficult to deal with or to understand. Right? I mean, when my wife had a child, she got 12 weeks off work. Did I get 12 weeks off? No. Right? Actually, believe it or not, under the law today, I could have gotten 12 weeks off if I wanted to. Okay? Men just generally don't take it. Okay? But so there are ways where we're trying to create that equality. There are other instances where we're really not. Okay? Another example, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in this class, gentlemen, when you turn 18, what do you have to do? You have to register for the draft. Ladies, do you have to do that? No. You do not currently. Now, listen, pay attention because that's going to change. Okay, there's already legislation introduced into Congress that is in the process of forcing women to register. Yes, ma'am.
I thought they denied it already. Because they tried to pass it, but it didn't go through. I heard.
I did not know that they'd taken a vote on it yet.
Yeah.
Oh, they might have. It had come out of committee like a month ago, 2 months ago, right before they took their like holiday recess. I didn't know that this new Congress had already voted on it.
I don't know.
Okay. When you're looking at this, the fundamental rights test is one of those things that has to get brought into it. Okay. Again, this is just talking about whether or not any sort of discrimination case is actually in violation of your basic rights or your understandings. Reproductive rights come into this, and just so you understand, although we'll talk about it a little bit more, the reproductive rights actually fall under a right to privacy. And I know I've only got like 1 minute, but this is the last thing that I wanted to get to so that you understand, because this is really the crux of sort of discriminatory practices when we talk about equality within marriage. All right? So, under the Clinton administration, yes, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton did this. They created the Defense of Marriage Act, which defined marriage specifically as a union between one man and one woman. Hillary Clinton was not a friend of the gays in the 90s. She wasn't, no matter what she claims. Okay? Once this happened, this was a federal law, it's called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, okay, that outlawed or criminalized gay marriage. This was at the heart of the whole sort of discriminatory practices as to whether or not this is a violation of people's rights. Okay? Ultimately, it basically is. Okay? Because ultimately what comes out of this is that there are advantages for straight couples, for married couples, regardless of gender identity, okay, in terms of like tax breaks and incentives and things like that. Right? Same thing with like health care. Like my wife and daughter are under my health care plan. And those privileges were not extended to same-sex couples, which is the definition of discrimination, which is why we've moved away from that. Okay? Go ahead and back up. I'll let you know. Okay. Bye. Have a good day. What's up?